Hi guys, welcome back to Motor City Musings with me, Adrian. Thank you for tuning in again. Today we're going to do something a little bit different for this channel so far. We're going to do a car review. Now this is my wife's 2024 F54 Mini Cooper Clubman John Cooper Works. 2024 was actually the last year of the Clubman. We're not sure if it's coming back, probably not.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here for a quick voiceover. First of all, I hope you can see that the video quality has improved dramatically. Sound, I feel I'm still getting there. But today, we're going to talk about the Clubman. I will touch on the background of the original Clubman that was made in the 70s and 80s, comment on the BMW taking ownership of the Mini brand, and then we'll talk about the current Mini Clubman and how I feel it fits into the automotive landscape, and why I feel it's always had a little bit of a bad rap from the press.
Mini Clubman's an interesting vehicle. The original, the Mini Minis, the British Minis, they were made in Clubman version from around 1970 to the early 80s. I think it was 1982. And fundamentally what that vehicle was it was the front end of the Mini GT, which was slightly different, looked a little bit different. By the magic of YouTube, there should be a picture somewhere. Anyway, that vehicle had the different nose, not quite as aerodynamic, but a little bit safer, a little bit better for cooling, more access. But at the back, it had what became iconic to the vehicle, double opening rear doors like a van. Anyway, that vehicle went out of production. Mini itself soldiered on through the 90s. BMW came and bought up the scraps of Austin Rover Group, whatever they were. They struggled on, but by the end of the 90s, BMW fundamentally sold everything that was left of the Rover Group to British Aerospace, but kept the Mini brand and the Mini vehicle. They then developed their own version, the new Mini, which launched around 2001, 2002. It was a hit, it was a global car, it came to the States. So, let's get the boring technical bits out. What is the current Mini Clubman? Well, the ex-Mini Clubman, it just went out of production, as I said. This is the F54 generation. This is a corporate front-wheel drive platform for BMW. It is shared, or was shared, with the previous generation Mini Countryman and also the BMW 1 and 2 Series vehicles. So this is the second generation Mini Clubman that BMW have made. As I said, BMW, when they brought them over, the first one they brought over in 2005 was fundamentally identical to the base Mini Cooper. They didn't even call it the Coupe at the time. It was just the Mini Cooper. But from the B-pillar back, that's the back edge of the front door, it was slightly different. It was like an inch longer in the wheelbase and about 3 inches overall, and it had that extended back and doors that we were just talking about. So when the M54 platform was launched in 2015, it had 3 engine options in this country. BMW's 2-litre corporate engine, with or without a turbo, I think. Over here you had the base Clubman with about 150 horsepower 4-cylinder. The Clubman S, which had 189 horsepower with the turbo added, and that carried on all the way through from 2015 to the end of production in 2024. We actually own another Clubman. It is a 2017 Cooper S, and that's fun to drive, not particularly quick, but it's nippy. The other version, though, was the John Cooper Works. The first version of the John Cooper Works on this platform had about 230 horsepower and just over 200 pound-foot of torque. But a few years later, they launched the updated version with 302 horsepower and 236 pound-foot of torque. That also went in the Mini Coupe GP edition. It was only available with the 8-speed Ison automatic because the manual could not take the torque. And it's that engine that makes this car very different. Let me introduce you to Dr. Jekyll and Mrs. Hyde. Back when I was growing up in the 80s and Group B rally cars were the thing, turbos were being thrown on everything. But in those days, turbos were laggy, they spooled up, they popped, they banged, they spit fire. They made a lot of power, but they weren't very refined, and we used to call those turbo nutter bastards. Well, this car has brought that back. It's not just this car. A lot of cars are getting these small capacity, high pressure turbos. You're getting them in luxury cars like Mercedes and things like that, and I don't get it. Because I can put up with that in this car because it's got that Jekyll and Hyde character. It can putter along in town being relatively comfortable. We'll talk about the ride comfort in a minute. But it's quite sprightly. But you want to get on it, you put it in sport mode, it pops, it bangs, it fizzes, but most of all you notice the lag. Now, it's not like an old 930 turbo where you put your foot down in second gear and the car would go 30, 30 and a half, 31, 35, 50. But it is a very on-off feeling, and it can be disconcerting. It's fun. I love this car because of the engine, popping, banging, snarling. We'll see it out on the road hopefully in a little bit, but it can be tiring. Sometimes you'll be at a junction, you're pootling through town, you go to accelerate, you put your foot down, you're going through the junction and nothing's happening, so subconsciously you put your foot down that bit further and then bang, you're shooting off down the road, popping, banging and looking like a hooligan. It's not great, but it's acceptable in a car like this where it's part of the character. It doesn't work for me in luxury cars.
And so after a quick pause for some hooliganism, we can talk about the car itself. Now that I mentioned earlier that I felt the Clubman had always received poor press. On one hand, people compare it unfavorably to things like the Subaru Crosstrek and other small hatches, wagons and crossovers because it is smaller, more expensive and less room inside. At the other end, it's compared poorly with things like the Civic Type R and Golf R because it's not as overtly sporting and again less practical than them. I think that's missing the point. One of the reasons people buy Minis is because they are small. Not everybody has bought into the giant SUV trend. Some people like smaller cars. The earlier new Minis were sometimes criticised for having slightly childish, gimmicky interiors. Now, that has carried on a little bit. There is still the very prominent centre console display, but that is now just a colour touchscreen and no longer the primary readout. That's now back in front of you. Again, with these latest ones, I'm actually not too keen on that primary display. I much prefer the display in our older Clubman that you can see here. It just looks and feels better quality to me. The flat LCD screen you've got now looks a bit cheap. Other than that, the interior, to my mind, is gorgeous. Really like the stitching on these seats. They're very comfortable, even for long distances. And believe it or not, we took 5 people and a small dog all the way to Montana and back in our old Clubman. Now, I do admit the kid who was in the middle of the back seat was happy when I flew home instead, but we managed it and it really wasn't as bad as people seem to think. As far as handling goes, the car is never going to be hardcore like a Type R. It is a front drive bias platform, and while it does have all-wheel drive, you are never going to feel any tail happiness unless you are in ice conditions. And so let's talk about the ride. That's something else that can be criticised in some road tests for being, quote, a little bit jiggly. But I really don't find it objectionable. And let's face it, this is a relatively small car, relatively short wheelbase, and not too much suspension travel. I would argue it actually rides far better than something like a Tesla Model S, which is okay in the front, but if you have ever sat in the back of one of those, you will know it is a punishment. It is harsh and it is noisy. The car is very comfortable. It can be deceiving on the freeway where you can suddenly find yourself doing 20 miles an hour faster than you realize because it's not overly noisy and, as I say, it is very smooth and can lull you into a false sense of security if you are not paying attention. The 8-speed automatic is perfectly acceptable. You can put it in manual mode and change up and down with the paddles, and when you are in manual mode, it will hold a gear even if you get to the red line. That's something that a lot of vehicles are criticised for, changing up at the red line whether you want to or not. Actual performance is pretty good with a 300 horsepower engine. 0 to 60 is a little bit under 5 seconds and a mid 13 quarter mile. So that's it. It's a great fun car. It works for our family. It's incredibly practical, yet small, and a lot of fun to drive. So to wrap up, if you are looking for a fun, sporty, premium, small wagon hatch, I think you could do a lot worse. It's a great car. Trying to compare it with other things is different. I had a look at Car and Driver, and the vehicles they compared it to were the Audi A6 Allroad, the Subaru Outback, and the Volvo V60 Cross Country. All of those are bigger cars, and two of them are definitely more premium than the Mini, so even Car and Driver don't know exactly what to compare it to. Compare it to what you like, and that's fine. Assess the car on your needs and wants. So that's it. Thank you for tuning in again, and please come back next time. Like, subscribe, and tell your friends.
So you might hear some whining and barking in the background. That's because we have our supermodel with us today. She is, where she loves to be, in the driver's seat, because if she's in the driver's seat, she knows Mummy and Daddy can't run away.